Hi, welcome everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started now. I've just been checking to make sure nobody else was coming in. I didn't see anybody. Welcome, I'm John, one of the co-owners here of Cove Street Arts, along with Kelly. We've also got Roy here, who along with Chris installed this beautiful show. We're really excited tonight to have a very special person and artist with us here, Munira Naqui, to talk about her exhibition that we're sitting in, Concrete Matter. This is actually the second time we've shown Munira's work here at Cove Street Arts. The first time was in a Works on Paper show, group show, that Bruce Brown curated. And ever since that show, we have been eager and excited to show and feature Munira in a larger show focused just on her work. So we're very excited and pleased with how it turned out. In addition to the folks here in the gallery, we're also live streaming on Facebook. So if you're watching on Facebook and you want to ask a question, just type it into the comment section. We'll read it here in the gallery and ask it at the end. I just caution you, go ahead and type it in when you have the question, because there's a bit of a delay between us here at the gallery and the live stream. So if you write it at the very end, we may not see it until the talk is over. So now a little bit about Munira. First of all, she has a fascinating life history. She was born in a small town on the coast of the Bay of Bengal in what is now Bangladesh. She left Bangladesh to go to Moscow State University in Russia, and then she came to the United States and went to the University of Pennsylvania and has also taken workshops and classes at Mecca, and now she's lived in Maine for almost 30 years. Her work is shown in galleries statewide, nationwide, and internationally. Her work's been shown from Europe to Australia. And she has regular exhibitions in both Paris and Amsterdam. I think getting ready to head off to Paris, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Munira is also the founder of the Drawing Collection, a group of 30-plus artists from 14 different countries. So please welcome International Woman of Mystery and one of our very favorite people, Munira Naqui.
Good evening, and thank you for coming and braving the weather. And I would like to thank John and Kelly for inviting me to show my work in this beautiful space, and also Roy German and Chris Benjamin for the beautiful installation. It takes a lot of invisible hands to get something together, and I want to thank every one of them for their effort in this. The body of work here is about space and form. I spent a lot of time actually preparing the ground to be ready to put the forms on it. And the best time for me is to actually spend the time with what you would call a blank canvas. In this case, these are boards with almost no color on it, because that is when I can think about what the forms will be and where they need to reside on the picture plane. The paintings are also, a couple of the paintings here, actually more than a couple, they are not just spatial compositions, they are also about balance. And the lines and the forms are considered carefully, with care, that where they will be. And my whole approach is to use the least amount of lines or forms on a painting to express what I want to express. And I work with a limited palette. I think here my limited palette got a little expanded, as you can see. And I think the space allows that too, so this is wonderful to be able to show the work here. What I also want to point out is that I love the precision in work, and I actually aspire towards precision. However, if you come close to it, you will see that there are deviations. It's not really perfect because it is a work of hand. And so it leaves that the imprint, and what it also tells you is that there is a living, breathing person and a flawed hand that creates the work. So those are those are the deviations that I allow for it to happen. And in some of the paintings, what I also did is the picture plane is expanded beyond the surface, the frontal surface of the painting, using the edges. So it expands towards the edge and also creates the shadow on the surface that is hanging. So the painting itself actually expands to the surface of the wall, and it changes the dimensionality of the paintings. Basically, all of the paintings are on spatial compositions, and with the, I will say that with one exception, which is the last two paintings on that wall, the two that are there on the with the softer colors, they are actually from my new series that I'm working on now. It's called Dear Earth. And the choice of the format is a letter format, because these are letters to the earth and letters of gratitude and apology. I always find myself that when I start a body of work for a show, that it naturally takes me to the next step. And I start, it always has the beginning of the next body of work that I'm working on. And those two particularly comes from that. The other group of painting that I'd like to point out is this cluster of paintings on this wall, which is titled Dreams of Home. These are probably my most personal set of paintings that I have ever shown. And I try to, because by nature the work is non-objective and non-narrative, and so I try to keep the narrative away from the work. However, this one, I have to say a little bit about it, is Dreams of Home is personal because I have had many homes. And I find myself, even when I travel, that wherever I stand, there are many places that I have felt very much at home. I have received hospitality and love from many places. However, I never felt residence anywhere. So I'm a nomad who carries the home inside me. And so these are the dreams of homes that I have and continue to have. And this is an ongoing series as well. That's all I want to say, and I would welcome questions from you. Thank you.
I want to hear more about that. There's more. Can you say any more about the Dreams of Home?
Well, these are just like I said, that from my travels and also places that I have been, including Maine. Maine has been the longest that I have lived anywhere in the world. And I feel very much at home. However, I have many homes and in many different places. So the colors are also from memory of those places. And the element that you see there is the roof line. And in some cases, it's not the roof line, it's the interior of a floor.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have two questions. One is to ask you to say a little bit more about the letters, which are very appealing to me. And also, my other question is just about both Rothko and Mondrian and how they've figured in your life, if at all.
Yeah. Well, Mondrian and Rothko and many others, they are great. They are painters I admire greatly, and I subscribe to their philosophies in many ways. Mondrian, particularly because of his order and structure. And while I was, these paintings came up after the time that we had during COVID, where we all found ourselves kind of in a pause. And I took shelter in the woods in Maine, where I have my studio, and the nature around it, I realized was a really big shelter for me, emotionally, physically, in every possible ways. And I'm not a nature painter. I don't paint landscapes. However, nature is actually an inspiration for me, because you can see in nature structure, and you also see order. And that order that the painters you just mentioned, and many others that I love, Agnes Martin would be another name to suggest, that I love that simplicity and the order. However, they worked with grids, if you talk about Mondrian, and I prefer to have a little opening. My paintings cannot be closed because I crave that openness, so that there is some opening in the picture plane. And so I will say that, and not just the masters that you mentioned, the non-objective painters of today's day, many of them here in Maine, in United States, in France, in Europe, and in Australia, I consider them as a big influence in my work.
Speaking of Mondrian, he had a spiritual connection in his work. Do you have that in your work?
I don't think I can claim that spiritual connection. If you call nature as part of that spirituality, then yes, but I think I'm the least spiritual in many ways and couldn't pretend to be that great.
So then I have a second part of the question.
Yes.
When I look at the work, I wonder about math, proportion, numbers. Are things ever determined because they're 1/3 of 2/3 of, do you use numbers to make a design?
I don't consciously make those, like it's not a calculated formula that I use, but I think that they are intuitively there. I used to be a student of math and science and work in the information technology for a long time. So I think what we do, we all probably bring our lives to our paintings, and so they seep in. But I don't, to answer your question precisely, I don't use a formula for it, but it's an intuitive sense and idea that, and balance is a very big thing for me, so I think it works into it.
Do you spend time designing these on paper before you paint them? Do you plan them out and go through a process that happens before you do the final paintings?
I do, but I don't really map it totally out, but there is an idea. I sit with the idea first for a very long time. I spend a lot of time before even I approach a painting, and I map out the colors and some ideas, but when I work, when I actually start working on the painting, that is when it really comes together. Yes?
Do you find that where you live, I've known you for a while, I've known a number of places where you've lived. So do you find that your work environment, your studio, influences the nature of the paintings you're working on and the different aspects of the paintings you're working on, geometry and so forth?
You know, it does. That's an interesting thing, because I discovered that myself, that it does. I didn't really was conscious about it, because there was a time when I had my studio in my house and it was at a lower level, and I didn't even realize that the windows were square, and the wall that was there, it had tiles that were 8-inch by 8-inch tiles. I never even paid attention to that, and my paintings started with an 8 by 8 inch, and all my paintings were square. And I didn't even make that connection until I moved from that space to a studio where it was a beautiful spot that you looked out and you saw the city hall, and you saw, it was not just my studio, I lived there, and so I had the studio right next door. And the windows were tall and long, and I couldn't paint the square paintings. So I went and I bought the rectangular sizes, and they were all vertical. So I think it does influence, and right now my studio has different windows. Like I have vertical, very low vertical window to see a rock garden, and then I have tall windows, slender ones. So, and I have square windows as well. So I think the windows, the light that comes in has an influence, probably. I was not conscious about it until I noticed the pattern. Yeah. Yes, John.
Okay, two questions for you. We'll start with the first one. So I find it interesting because it goes with Greg Parker's show in the next room, that you also use, in a lot of these paint the sides, and use the sides of the panel as part of the painting.
Yes.
And like in this one, it's wonderful because you've got the red on the side and just the red lines, which sort of give it a three-dimensional quality. And so I was wondering if you could kind of talk about the decision to sort of incorporate the sides into it as a painting or as an almost three-dimensional object. What you're going for with that, and I'll ask the second question later. That sounds like it.
I will go back to a little bit of history, that the first time I painted the sides, that is when I was invited to a group show, and they had asked very specifically that it had to be 10 by 10 inches, it had to be a grid of 10, and at that point I just felt that there were too many rules and that you had to really limit to a 10 by 10. So what I did, as half jokingly probably, I decided, and I think a little bit of it you will see here, that if I can show you this one, that the painting actually goes on the edge and it moves around. So I just decided that I was going to go off that. I was given only the 10 by 10 territory. I guess it was a little bit of a land grab. And so, so I went on the side and expanded it. I never really made a statement or said, it is the first time I'm sharing it, that I actually took over the space. Here, it was interesting when Kelly asked me if I had a large size painting, and I worked in encaustic, and so it was very hard to go really large. So my largest painting was 36 inch by 36. And so I asked her, what do you mean, how large is large? Because I thought 36 by 36, okay, I can manage, it will be fine. And she said, how about 48 by 48? I'm only 5 feet tall. and I work flat on a surface, I don't work on an easel. And so I thought, I have to figure out 48 by 48. One, I don't know how big that is. And then I really have to figure out how to reach the middle part of it. And also, because the surface has to be smooth, it has to be very uniform for me. I couldn't just do a gestural work. Can you imagine that I had to take over your wall? Because then I thought, okay, so I wasn't really limited with the 48 by 48. I painted the edge. The same thing like I said before, that the painting of the edge is more to change the dimensionality of the painting. And also, I think it is interesting because I also wanted to play with the idea that you have very different viewpoints depending on where you stand. And particularly in that painting and a few others where the sides are painted, what you are seeing depends on where you are standing. If you move, then you see the edge. If you stand right in front of it, you only see the picture plane, the frontal plane. And I thought that was an interesting way to emphasize the idea that we can all have very different viewpoints seeing the same thing. Yes?
You say you work with a predetermined palette, and it's pretty evident, but how did the pink sneak in?
Because, yes, that's a very good point, because pink is not my color. and my friend Becky knows that. And, but I think that sometimes you need to get out of your box, and more than that, actually, this one it's the pink on the sides of the buildings of a place where I was visiting. The sky was gray, but you know, the glow of the pink stone, and that is why, probably not the same color, but these colors are all from memory, and memory is never perfect. I have a series of work that is actually finding the color from my memory, and I can never find it, so the series goes 5 pieces of trying to find the color, each rose for each color. So that is how this came about. Yes?
So have you moved away from encaustic and graphite, or is there something less concrete about that, or what's happening there?
I used, encaustic is always one of my favorite mediums, but they work, it's a very labor-intensive medium, and more than that, if you have larger pieces to do, and with COVID, we had supply issues, a lot of supply issues even with paint, and a lot of my paint I actually collect when I travel to Paris or Amsterdam, and so I was kind of nervous about taking on a project with all encaustic. I haven't really given up on it because it's still one of my favorite things, and graphite particularly. And I think that the work you're probably referring to is from my series Silence, where I used graphite because that allowed for the gesture and a different kind of a surface. Yeah.
You just touched on a topic for me. In your studio, is it silent when you work, or is there something being played? Or
Absolutely silent. Absolutely meaning as silent as it can be. I don't listen to music. I can't listen to music when I'm working because then I'm paying more attention to the music. Music is never a background for me. It's a very serious thing. So when I listen to it, I have to listen just to music. The only time I make an exception is when I do the grunt work of sanding. That is when I will use music. And that too, if I'm paying a lot, I have to pay a lot of attention. I can't listen to music. So it is silent, and not just silent. No one enters my studio. And even people who could enter, they stand outside. I have a glass door, so they stand outside until I can see them so that they can enter. When I'm working, no one enters. So I am alone, but I'm not lonely. It's a solitary thing. I think we painters, all of us who are painters know this, that our work is solitary because we work in the studio, and I don't work with assistants or anyone. I work by myself, and I love that, that one-on-one connection with my work, and I need it. It's a very, as much as I love human company, that is not the time for that, for me.
Can you talk about the palette in some of these other more feminine flat white thread, and then there's the cream or the terracotta color?
Yes. I think you just pointed out, when I'm working on something, how I transition sometimes, because the gray and red has been, the gray, black and red has been my palette for a long time. And red and white, because this was a work which is a little bit older than these other works. And those were the palettes that I worked with. And I think I was kind of, this particular painting, the Summer Solstice, that is actually a transition for me when I ended and I moved to the Earth, the Dear Earth series. And so it is still like the palette changed. If you stayed with me in my studio, you would see that my color tubes and the palette stays the same for a few, and then it changes. So I think that is where you see the little shift, and it was also, I tried it out and I thought that, yeah, that still works for me. And so that is why I said that in this show you see a bit of the expansion of my palette. No?
Or are you getting softer?
Oh, if I'm getting softer? I think that when you write letters of gratitude and apology, you are in a soft place, and we better be that. And so I think when I think of earth, those are the colors that actually remind me more of the earth. And I started out with that, so I think that is where the softness happened. And this is an ongoing series, and I'm actually currently working on it. And there is a painting that is almost all white, and just different shades of white. You can call it white, it's more like a beige, warm white, but somebody may look at it and say it's all white. So that is not part of this show because it wasn't ready at that time, and we didn't want to crowd it either. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Are there words to the letters?
They're for you to write. I have my words. I have my words. My words are usually, I keep a journal, and I also keep a lab book to see what, for each painting. And the journals are where probably I write the concepts down or what evoked the idea behind those, but they have never seen the eyes of anybody but mine. Yes.
That goes to another question I had. Speaking of the journals, and no one else ever seen them, so maybe you don't want to answer this one, but so in terms like this painting here is entitled Summer Solstice. So are you starting with the concept, okay, I'm painting Summer Solstice, or is the title coming after the fact?
Actually, the titles, it depends. On this one I can come back to, but for instance, when I was painting that painting right behind you, John, that painting, I did not, name it, title it first. It was basically playing with the color blocks, the shapes and the lines, and then, I realized that when I completed it, that it is actually about balance, because I was working on balance is always in the back of my mind, no matter what painting, where I have the paintings or what I'm painting, regardless of its title. But that one, you can see that the red is kind of, it creates the tension between the perfect balance of the two, the line and the grays and the black, and that was purposeful. And so when I did that, the title came later. And the solstice was something actually, I do observe solstice, to answer your question. I'm not spiritual, but there are certain things that I do follow. And then I come from a tradition where there are festivities every month, every week, kind of a deal. A little bit of a overload, festival overload. And I'm glad that I have kind of left that behind and have become festival-less as much as possible. So solstice is something that is still very, very dear to me, because it's a very interesting mark of a time when nature changes, and we change also. So I was actually looking at the colors around, and what the colors came, and that is why the red is not really pure red. I usually rarely mix colors, but that is a mixed color that I have there, because I wanted the red of what I saw. So that painting, yes, the solstice was the idea, the concept. I mean, the title came during the concept, and then I left the title. Usually, there was a time when I didn't title my work, and they were all left untitled, and I loved that the mystery remained, and also because I believe that these are constructive. I admire constructivist work, and I love the idea that it is for the viewer to construct their own narrative or on their own experience, and you should not, as an artist, tell them what to think about. And And then, I changed that idea of not titling any of my paintings. One, it was very hard to keep up which one I was referring to. Even I got confused because there was only a number. And then I had to find what untitled this number, which painting it was. And I was also advised by the gallery director in Amsterdam, who said, just a very minimal title is helpful, because that at least gives an idea about where you started. So I hope that, it doesn't matter where I started, and I've shared a lot more than I probably needed to for you to build your own narrative, but you are free to rename them, because if they go home with someone, I don't think John gives them the titles, do you, John? But anyway, even if he does, yeah, but even if he gives you the title, you don't have to put it on the wall. The painting goes, and you can name it whatever you want. Yes.
You and I have talked about this a little bit, but could you comment on how your work is received in Europe versus America, European audiences for this kind of work versus American audiences for this kind of work?
I don't know if my comment is going to be a little biased, but that is totally from my experience. My first show happened in Paris, which surprised me. I was shocked because I thought, this is home. Maine is home. And I have lived here in the United States since 1982. And I have, like I said, Maine is the longest I have lived anywhere in the world. I didn't even live in the country I was born this long. I was 17 when I left. And so it was surprising for me. And also, I think there's a tradition more, and they continued that tradition, which I hate to say that they have a stronger tradition of minimal work, because minimalism grew here in the United States. But I think it has always remained a very small kind of audience for it. And I have been told that people sometimes struggle and think it's not accessible. But I think you just have to just look at it and find meaning. And so there is a difference in that terms. I find that in Europe, I think they're more used to, or maybe where I show, they are more used to it. So I have had more shows in Europe than in United States, and also people have collected more in Europe. But that is also probably a matter of time, how long I have shown in places.
I wanted to follow up when you just talked about sort of the mystery and the viewer sort of bringing their own interpretation or their own views to it. I was wondering, because I noticed in the question earlier about the series over there, which is your most personal series, that you talk about the paint, but you certainly did not mention the place that it actually was, other than it was a place you had been to, but you didn't say where. And so I'm wondering, even with this more personal work, where it does have more of a definite meaning to you, do you still want that sort of mystery with the viewer, or is it a little more, okay, yes, the blue and the orange to me are in this place, or you still want the viewer to just sort of have that removal from your interpretation of it and have their own?
I would prefer to remove my narrative of it, because my narrative I think when we paint, even if we paint in the most minimal possible way, and it's totally non-objective, it's not an abstraction of anything. And I think my narrative stays with the painting and me in my studio. When it goes out to the world, then it is non-objective, it needs to stay there and free from my narrative. I don't think that I need to tie my personalities or my stories with it. Just like, when our children grow up, we have to let them go and be their own people. That's the whole idea about it. Yes.
Do you get emotionally involved when you paint? Is it more intellectual stimulation? Is it more emotional? Both?
I think both. Both. I think you cannot, or maybe I could never separate the two. And so those are pretty seamlessly integrated for me. Yes.
Munira, I wanted to give you a compliment on the painting on the easel, which
Yeah.
I think of as a very brave painting. And I wondered if you wanted to say anything about that one.
Why did you think it was brave, may I ask?
It just strikes me as it's very balanced and poised, but it's also really in your face. So to me, it speaks of kind of an affront, an act of courage, a dare, a kind of a dare.
I'm really very pleased to hear that. The reason is that these paintings were done. This is from a series of paintings that I did during 2016 on. And I felt that, and I worked with lines. And actually, lines have been a very dominant part of my paintings, even when I did the graphite work. And with encaustic, lines were always there. The lines were important to me from when I was a very young child, because you see lines everywhere, not in nature necessarily, but yes, you do see in nature as well. But in our lives we see, and all lines that you see in your life, the rules that you don't cross the line, you don't step over the line, or you step over the line, you cross the line. So these lines are arbitrary lines. And I come from a land. I was born in a country that changed names 3 times from my mother's lifetime to mine. And it was all very arbitrary. The land didn't change. It is the same land that is there. And that is why in my biography, I write only about the position of the place where I was born, and not the political name of the country necessarily, because it changed, even in my lifetime. And all it was is an arbitrary line of a ruler and a pencil or a pen on a map. And so these lines remain, and we build those lines between us also. So that painting is how apart we are. But we are still close. I think it can be bold, but it is also hopeful, because the line, it could be minimum, even less. Maybe in my other paintings it is, you will see a narrower line. Yes, yeah, that is why. And also the painting there where, that John pointed out, the painting which is titled Reach. These are 2 parallel lines, and the title is Reach. They're trying to reach, but they are nowhere near. And as we know, Euclidean mathematics says that parallel lines don't meet. But if you're non-Euclidean, then you can say it meets in infinity. I think it's still hopeful. I would love to hear more about that.
About the concept of distance in your work. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And then especially trying not to make it personal, but with these works, like where you're talking about home and then that idea, if that plays in at all, or if that's too narrative, I don't know.
Yeah. So it's distance, whether distance plays in my work, it does. And I think that we find distances, not just physically, I have experienced distances. When you leave a place, already have. And then for a very long time, until I lost my mother last year, there was always this huge distance, and not just the geographical distance that I had. There were distances because I had changed. And then also distances we find among ourselves with ideas and thoughts. So those are there. But despite the distances, I think that I remain focused on the commonality. And that is the whole idea why my paintings are not necessarily culturally imbued, because it doesn't necessarily have anything from my socio-cultural thing that I bring in, because my whole idea through this painting is to find that common ground where we can meet, where people can understand. This is not, I think I would have liked to be a writer, but then what language do you write in? Who can read yours? And the other thing also is that it limits, because then, you know, it's language specific. Writing is language specific. But painting, the beautiful power of painting is that it's not specific to any language. And so I think it is actually more accessible. And you can see that, and you can express yourself, and you don't have to necessarily lean on language for it. John mentioned the drawing collective, and that I founded several years ago. And the whole idea was based on that we all draw, all these artists, they're sculptors, some of them draw primarily, and then others draw as sketches or something, but you know, they're all drawing. And these are artists from 16 countries, and many of them don't have a common language. We communicate through Google Translate. And yet our work hangs beautifully together. And when we get together, we still can communicate. I have met almost all of them with the exception of 3 faced one-on-one, but that is how we exist. And I think that is what is the beautiful thing about finding that common ground, and in that case it's drawing, and I think that painting also can bring you to that common ground where the distances can come closer. Should we? Yes?
Actually, I guess you can talk about this one in the corner here, a little bit gray. Unlike a lot of the other ones, really sort of
Yes.
challenges your focus and your eye, you know, to really see it. It almost sort of, because of the colors, feels like it's moving a bit.
I think that the color on that particular painting, John, can you tell me the title of that painting? I should know.
Finding a way.
Yeah. That painting comes from the series where I was painting. My palette was very gray, different shades of gray, but it was all gray. And red, and that particular red, because I think it kind of, when the position of the lines, when I considered that evoked the idea of movement, and that was, and also, you know, the brightness of that red, considering the other reds here, is different, because if you want to find your way, you need a little brighter beacon to show you the way. So it's not a lighthouse, but it's not a lighthouse. Yeah. If anybody is looking for a lighthouse painting. Yeah.
I'm curious to know why you showed the photographs. The photographs and the
Oh, I didn't choose the photographs. No. Actually, when John told me that there would be a background, and I came and saw myself in two different, and I thought, I was going to tell you that Munira Naqui is not here today. She's right on the screen. I'm her twin sister. And we're not in good terms. That's why you will never see us together. But John was not excited about it. He thought it was funny, and I decided, no, I better at least, there's enough mystery, I think, we create. And I have been told that let's not make it less accessible. So I can't just go into hiding and pretend I'm somebody else.
What are you working on next? What's your next step?
The Dear Earth series, yeah.
Are you excited about it?
I am. At the same time, it is kind of sad. And a lot of sad because there's a lot to apologize for what we did to the earth. And particularly the place where I was born, in 50 years' time, it is going under the sea. That place is it's one of the biggest story of climate change, and it is threatened by the waters, the rising waters. And particularly the place where I grew up is right at the edge of that. So there's a lot of sadness there. At the same time, I think there's gratitude because the earth is what we have, all we have. And I think there's a lot to be grateful for. And so it's an emotionally charged series for me. But I hope that those emotions stay in my studio. And when it comes out, they can come out as peaceful as those two paintings. Yeah.
Coming up on the hour, so if there are
Yeah.
no other questions. Oh, wait, sorry. Going on, so this is from a viewer online, let's call her Diamond, who would like for you to, you touched on it a bit, but just maybe circle back. She would like for you to talk a bit about red, sort of what's the significance, and if the color has a personal connection, sort of what that is. So I guess, Diamond's trying to pierce the mystery. So answer to the extent you want.
Okay. I think I should keep it short because you have been very patient and we're coming to the end of the hour. Red has always been a very favorite color of mine. I think red signifies change and it's hopeful, and here red is the color of love. I don't think I particularly focus on that part. I'm not a big Valentine's Day fan, but red has always been, I think it's a color of change. If I can say, it's the color of revolution. And so any change, major change, is well depicted with the color red. And I always loved red. I love black personally, and I wear a lot of it, but I always like a little bit of red in it. And Diamond can, and I can talk about it at length later. Thank you so much for your patience.